This podcast is sponsored by Orchid Live. Find out more at orchidlive.com. Hello and welcome to the SOM podcast. I'm Steve Randall, and this episode is one of a monthly series to help you as an occupational health professional with your CPD, as we invite specialists to share an overview of some of the topics you've told us you'd like to find out more about.
My name is Clare Forshaw. I'm the Professional Head of Health and Wellbeing at the RSSB, and I'm also a founder and director of the UK Hearing Conservation Association.
Well, Claire, welcome. We're talking about hearing health, which is something we don't necessarily talk about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think hearing health is certainly somewhat overlooked. I've always, in my role as working in health and the health side of health and safety for many years, proclaimed that we don't treat health like safety, and health is the poor relation of safety. And I think I've found that exposure to noise and hearing health is the poor relation of health. It's kind of deemed one of those topics that, you know, it doesn't kill people, that it's an inevitable result of aging, whereas actually all hearing loss is preventable if we protect our hearing. And certainly in trades and industries like yourself, I think it's now becoming more realised that actually hearing and good hearing is important for our jobs, our roles, our happiness, and a lot of the things we enjoy in life, including human connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know several people just in my family and friendship group who suffer, for example, with tinnitus, which may or may not be the result of exposure to loud noise in their work environment, but certainly it's something that does affect the quality of their life.
That's, again, an under-recognised co-symptom of noise-induced hearing loss. We know that people exposed to noise can be similarly affected by tinnitus. And again, interestingly, like a lot of occupational health diseases, until you talk to people and ask them or mention some of these topics, I wouldn't say it's taboo, but people just don't kind of open up and discuss these things openly. And people say, oh, I've suffered from tinnitus. It really affects me. I can't sleep properly. And again, going back to that kind of hearing loss allegedly doesn't kill people. You know, a lot of people find tinnitus so intrusive and so impactful on their lives that then in extreme cases, people have, you know, resulted in taking their own life because it's such an invasive issue for them to deal with. We shouldn't have to struggle with these things. You know, if we can prevent them, if we can educate these health issues, you know, we can take them more seriously and look to protect ourselves rather than putting up with these things. We now know through more recent studies that noise-induced hearing loss is one of the biggest, what we call kind of modifiable risk factors for early onset dementia. We don't know the exact kind of causal pathway of how or why that link exists. The idea is that I went back to that kind of comment before about, you know, communication, connection, going to events that we enjoy. When you've got hearing loss or you find it difficult to hear in background noise, you retreat from those social situations. That impacts on our kind of cognitive capacity. So it does lead, you know, potentially to, you know, poor well-being, depression, and as I say, this link that's now been established to early onset dementia. So it is much broader than just an aging issue and we can just get some hearing aids and, you know, everything will be fixed and we'll just put up with it. But hearing aids, are, as clever as the technology is becoming, they don't replace the kind of real kind of delicate nature of our natural hearing capacity, those kind of, you know, frequencies that are tuned into human voices.
And in the workplace, it's kind of a shared responsibility, isn't it, between the employer offering ways to reduce the impact of loud noise and other things that may damage our hearing, but also the employee, particularly where things are not mandatory, choosing to take up those measures that are on offer.
Yeah, as I say, there's a growing recognition within the kind of entertainment sector of the importance of protecting the hearing, but you know, the kind of massive prevalence and use now of listening devices. You know, you look at anybody walking down the street, sitting on the tube, on a bus, public transport. So many people now are connected to audible content throughout their day. A lot of people can go to work, whether it's a noisy workplace or not, but they could have had their full noise dose, if you like, the full safe limit of exposure before they've even got to the workplace. If it's not a noisy workplace, they could be listening to content at work. They could go home and, I don't know, do some gaming or whatever else, or go to a club or, the cinema, go to the gym. I mean, gyms can be really loud as well. That kind of idea of crank up the music and work harder. It's, not about spoiling people's fun. It's not about saying, don't listen to loud things. It's really bad for your ears, because that's just going to switch people off. But using your kind of noise dose in a sensible way, thinking about how much kind of noise you're consuming, don't overuse it, that you ruin it, and I say that irreversible loss. Once it's gone, you don't get it back. Tinnitus, there's no cure for tinnitus. There's no reversible way to restore your hearing either.
You see, Claire, I now feel duty bound to say, anybody who's listening to this podcast, do you need it to be as loud as it is?
Yeah, simple things like, noise excluding headsets typically mean you don't have to ramp up the content to drown out the background noise around you. The only caveat is, if you're using noise excluding headsets, be careful of your awareness of your surroundings. Yes. But yeah, just think about, how loud are you listening? How long are you listening to it for?
And are there particular sounds that are worse for our hearing than others? I mean, it seems to me, just purely off the top of my head, that actually those sort of the sort of treble sounds, those sort of higher frequencies, for example, are potentially worse than more bassy sounds, but maybe that's not right.
There is some evidence around kind of unwanted noise. So we call noise the kind of unwanted acoustic energy. And because it's unwanted, affects us in a more negative way, and some idea that if we're enjoying sound, and sound is something we want to listen to as opposed to the noise, that it has less of a damaging effect. But it's difficult to prove, outright whether that's a real thing. But it's all energy, and that energy enters our ears, and our ears are made up of like really fine hair cells. So if we just think of it from an energy perspective, once those hair cells are knocked out, that's not going to recover. So we're really looking at protecting the frequencies of our ear, our hair cells that allow us to hear, as I say, conversation and music and things like that. So some frequencies of loss wouldn't affect our lives as much, but the kind of common noise exposure that we get in the workplace, that kind of middle range, is going to affect us in that area that we really use and value.
And some workplaces will have constant noise, others will have loud impacts every so often. Is there any difference between the two in terms of damage to your hearing?
Yeah, and those kind of impact short duration, high energy noises can in and of themselves cause immediate damage. It has to be fairly loud, so we're talking kind of like gunshots and things like that. There are legal limits around peak levels of impact noises and your kind of continuous background noise. I think what I find quite often is people forget about the impact noises if they're not extremely loud but still exist. So we kind of average out those sound exposures in the workplace. They can be more harmful in addition to those background noises. So if you've got a fairly high level continuous noise, and then you've got these kind of short burst noises coming in that you haven't assessed for, because your ears, if you like, your hair cells in your ears are already stressed, that short impact noise can be more damaging than the background levels. It's not just about, putting headphones on or ear protection. Really we should be turning the sound down where we can, moving away from the noise where we can, not creating the noise. A lot of noise is created in workplaces where we can just switch things off. And going back to that kind of the impact of why it's so important, it reminded me of a quote from an American activist called Helen Keller, who was deafblind. She lost her sight and a hearing at a young age. And she sort of quoted saying, losing my sight took me away from things, but losing my hearing took me away from people. And I think that's quite a profound, way for us to think about. We usually think about our sight as being, so important because we like to see what's around us and don't maybe value how much we use our sense of hearing to connect with people.
Now, an OH professional might go into a workplace, perhaps it's a new client, and they'll immediately notice noise that those who work there all the time are perhaps oblivious to largely. How do they bridge that with the employer?
If you're standing 2 meters away from someone and you're having to raise your voice to have a conversation with them, straight away you can assume that level of noise is harmful. So if that's the situation you're in, again, we use our senses, we walk around, we look, we listen and say, this is pretty loud and it seems to be coming from that thing over there. What can we do about that thing there that's creating all this noise? And why are all these people milling around it, being exposed? So just sometimes having that conversation and you typically when you do, going back to the kind of mental health impact, workers won't say, oh yeah, it's really noisy, it hurts my ears, because it won't hurt their ears, but they might say things like, yeah, it's really noisy, it's distracting, it's stressful. If you've ever been in a noisy place that you don't want to be in, so I don't know, these kind of kids play areas or noisy shops, you come out and you feel on edge, don't you? You feel that
Yes.
fight or flight instinct and go, God, thank God I got out of that situation. It was so noisy, it was driving me insane. And, again, go back to that kind of mental health impact, that's not good for people. And we know there's a link with this kind of cardiovascular response and that stress response to those environments as well. So if we can just quieten our world a little bit where we don't want to be affected by these noises that we don't want to listen to, maybe we'll all be a little bit happier and calmer as well.
How can people find out more about you, Clare, and how can they get in touch with you?
Our work through the UK Hearing Conservation Association, you can find us online under that kind of title for our website and on the socials. You go through those routes and I'm sure you'll be able to find me on LinkedIn as well. So if you ever want to contact, I'm quite passionate about this. I've been involved in the topic for quite a long time, so always happy to have a chat with anybody about this.
This podcast is sponsored by Orchid Live. Orchid Live is a specialist occupational health software used by a number of SOM members to run every aspect of their occupational health operations. They hold healthcare records for over 1 million UK workers and work with both in-house OH teams and OH providers. You can find out more at orchidlive.com.